Well, this is a different picture. This is a totally different picture. But we will look at this picture from last time. So. Oh, are you handing out? You have the temple one too? Okay. All right. So before we leave the third chapter, go into the fourth chapter, I wanted to talk about imagery in Revelation in a way that I don't think it's been talked about before. And imagery of God, Christ, the living beings, the throne, and the heavenly city of God. And as we go through, as we get into the fourth chapter, we'll have Laodicea next week. But getting into the fourth chapter begins that imagery that everybody talks about. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit from an Old Testament perspective, having to do with the things that are seen and talked about and all of that. And if you've ever read your Old Testament, you get into Numbers and there's a description of how Israel encamped. And might wonder how what that has anything to do with Revelation and its imagery. But there was a certain way that Israel encamped. And even Balaam, who was supposed to curse Israel, when he saw the encampment of Israel, he described it as being beautiful, as being well organized. Okay. But there were some things that they did, and we know, if you read about the angels that attend, that it talks about there, they look kind of strange. Ezekiel talks about them also. Isaiah talks about them. Okay, and so there's their faces were strange in the sense of they weren't necessarily all human faces. Okay, and then at the top of this, the face of a human, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, and the face of an eagle. We've heard about that. In other words, what they look like and the way the angels or seraphim looked. Okay, in Jewish tradition, while in the wilderness, Israel camped under 4 standards. Levi camped around the around the tabernacle, containing the Shekinah glory of God, God's divine presence. And if you look at this little picture, to look down on Israel, kind of like Balaam would have, okay? You see the layout, and looking at this picture, to the right is the east. No, I'll take that back. Down low, the lower quadrant is east, and then up toward the top is west, and then to the left is south, and to the right is north. Their encampment was this way every time, okay? Every time they encamped, it was like that. And here in the center was Levi, okay? The three, and if reading your Old Testament, you will hear these names mentioned. And Moses, Aaron, and his sons were camped. That's number 1. And Korah, where they camped, that's number 2. Gershon, okay, was number 3. And it's kind of blurry. Merari was number 4 on the east. Okay. So in the center was the tabernacle. Around it was the Levites who took care of the tabernacle, all the utensils. Each one of them were trained in that. Remember the man that touched the ark when David was transporting it? Okay, he was from one of these tribes that was trained how to handle the ark. So he wasn't just a guy helping. He was a guy who knew what he was supposed to do. And when he touched the ark, that was it, okay? God was serious about the handling of this area of the tabernacle. Around the outside, and if you read in the Old Testament, around the outside, each of these camps were referred to as a war camp, okay? Referred to as where the warriors camped. And so we find here that there was a specific layout every time. Every time. And so where they encamped, you can see Dan, Ephraim, Reuben, and Judah. Those four were the main tribes. And each of those northern, southern, eastern, and western camps, they all were camped under that one banner, while each one of them had their own banner, okay? Those banners had certain images on them, certain colors on them, okay? And so the four that were important was Ephraim, Dan, and Reuben, and Judah. And if you here we're talking about the encampment, the 12 tribes of Israel camped under 4 banners. Thus, there were 4 groupings with 3 tribes in each group and 1 tribe seen as the leader. And those were, on the south was Reuben, which was symbolized by a man on their banner, okay? The color was red or jasper, sardis. The north was Dan, symbolized by an eagle, and the color was blue or sapphire. So when looking at this is what each banner that they camped under is a traditional thing. It doesn't say that necessarily in the Bible, but it refers to that. And if you read you remember when Jacob gave a blessing to his children before he passed away in Egypt, he talked about each one, and there he gave a synopsis of their character. And so when he says that, some of these things you can see, Judah being the lion, he talked about that. He talks about another one being a servant. And so we see here that image here under those banners of that blessing come to play with the camp of Israel, okay? You notice Levi doesn't necessarily camp under the banner because they're camped with God. They're part of God's encampment. And then Ephraim symbolized the calf or an ox. The color was golden or beryl. Now, on the shoulders of the priest, onyx stones were there. And those stones had 6 names on each stone to bear it like a servant, okay? And Ephraim represented that in this ox situation of bearing a burden. So did the high priest in bearing the names of Israel. And that's in Exodus 28:12. On the east was Judah, symbolized by a lion, and the color, and some of these stones throughout the Bible are kind of intermixed, okay? But generally they're pretty much the same throughout the Bible, including the Old Testament. But with Judah, there were 2 kinds of stones that was a tradition. One was a red stone or ruby carbuncle. And of course, Judah is the lion. And then turquoise also. In the breastplate, if you read about the breastplate of the priest, there were 12 stones in the breastplate. And Judah's stone was emerald or turquoise, okay? It was green. But they reference throughout the Bible, they kind of move around in the sense of some of their colors. And then Israel encamped around the tabernacle so that it was seen to be in the middle of the site and would be well protected from an incursion or unwelcome attacks. So in the way that they encamped the way the people were around it and the warriors that were in each of the tribes, they would be ready, okay, from any attack. So we see that the camping arrangement then was for the firstborn of the tribe. So at Reuben on the south, Judah on the east, Ephraim on the west, and Dan on the north. And down here it refers to the sons of Israel shall camp each by his own standard with the banners of their fathers, their households. They shall camp around the tent of meeting at a distance. On the east side toward the sunrise shall be the standard or the camp of Judah, then Issachar and Zebulun. Okay. And then on the south side shall be the standard of the camp of Reuben, and those who camp next to him shall be the tribe of Simeon. And then comes Simeon and Gad, and then on the west shall the standard of the camp of Ephraim be, and then next to him shall be Manasseh and Benjamin. If you look, these are sort of going by the birth order of Israel, because Ephraim and Manasseh were sons of Joseph, and Benjamin was his brother, and both of those came from the same mother. Okay? So we see that the encampment kind of went by the order of birth in the sense of the association. Now, Levi being in the center kind of messed it up a little bit in the sense of the grouping. Okay? And then on the north side shall be the standard, the camp of Dan, and those who camp next to him shall be the tribe of Asher and Naphtali. So the reason I'm talking about these has to do with the images on their standard and the color, and then it coinciding with the breastplate and the stones that were in the breastplate. Okay? Each of the stones had the name of the tribe carved in it. Okay? On the shoulders of the high priest was the onyx stones, and there were 6 names on each one. Okay? So we see that there is a visual here that has to do with stones, banners, images. Okay? We see that the camp was ordered in this way by how God told them to order it. And so the birth order of the 12 sons of Jacob were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, which is Ephraim and Manasseh, and Benjamin. The breastplate stones, and they're named here. Down below, if you look to the next page, there are several options of that mix of stones, okay? And I went through these and looked, and most of them stay with the tribe that they were in the breastplate. Some of them move around some, okay? So I mentioned the onyx stones. It was carved with 6 names on it. The onyx stone appears as a symbol of purity and righteousness. It is often associated with the themes of holiness, divine presence, symbolizing the unity and chosen status of God's people. So the bearing of the names before the Lord had to do with holiness, carved into the onyx stones, okay? In Job 28:16, it says, "It is written, it cannot be valued in gold or Ophir, in precious onyx or sapphire." This comparison underscores the idea that wisdom and spiritual discernment are more precious than any material wealth. That includes the onyx stone and the holiness. That wisdom is important. That wisdom and discernment. Strapped the breastplate that had the stones had golden chains, and it was tied to the ephod. Does anyone know what the ephod was used for? The ephod was used for, if you read, David, different ones, consulted the priest with the ephod that would give discernment and understanding of what to do. Okay? And so tied together with the breastplate was the ephod, and it was the part that gave discernment. Okay? It was the part that those together, the priest was bearing the names of the people, and then those stones represented the people. Okay? And so we see that this is quite complicated in the sense of what God had Israel doing in their encampment, and how the priests represented the people. So I mentioned this for a reason. It has to do with the living creatures and what is described in Revelation having to do with the throne of God and Christ and the living creatures that were attending there. And so we see here that I wanted to get this out here so that whenever we go into the 4th chapter, you'll understand these stones and the different descriptions that are talked about there and how it relates to Israel and their encampment. Okay. It says the 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature had a face of a lion, second living creature like an ox, the third living creature face of a man, the fourth living creature a flying eagle, and the 4 living creatures each having 6 wings full of eyes all over and within and underneath their wings. Day and night they never stopped saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and who is to come. Whenever the living creatures offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to him who sits on the throne, the 24 elders fall down and prostrate before him who is sitting on the throne, and they worship him who lives forever and ever, and they throw down their crowns before the throne, crying out. These images here are the same images of the banners that were represented in the camp of Israel. Okay? Each one. Okay? So the one I'm trying to make a point here of is the imagery you read in Revelation is not new. Okay? It was already set in the way that Israel conducted themselves in the camp of the tabernacle. Okay? That they have always existed. So people who talk about these as being sort of random in the sense of not coming from the Bible, that they're kind of something that is new, they're not. They are already talked about in the Old Testament. Okay? So these images that we see here are directly related to Israel and, more importantly, to Christ. Okay? And then the living creatures in Ezekiel, in the fire existed 4 living creatures having the form of a human, each of the 4 having 4 faces, 4 wings, and 4 hands. The 4 created sort of a square. I don't know if you've ever read in Ezekiel that description. Whenever Solomon built the temple, in the Holy of Holies, there were some angels or seraphim. And their one wing touched one wall, the other wing touched the other seraphim, and the opposite wing touched the other wall. Okay? Here we see that in Ezekiel, these angels do the same thing, and they form a square. They touch, each wing touches the next, but in a perpendicular way. Okay? There's a creation of very similar to what the layout of the tabernacle and the encampment was. Okay? Sort of a 4 square. And each of the faces, okay, they moved, they did not turn, they moved directly their face was looking. Okay? They didn't turn from the direction they were. It didn't change. And so we see here that this imagery that Ezekiel, who was a priest, was very similar to this layout. Okay? And so we see that this representation is a representation of these 4 living creatures. Okay? And their imagery, their legs, and all of that were very much similar to what we the first chapter of Revelation, talking about the bronze legs and that imagery there. Okay. The laver was constructed, and the laver was bronze. Whenever you went into the court where they gathered for sacrifice, it was all bronze. Okay, we find that there was, with these creatures, there was a bronze having to do with judgment, having to do with sacrifice, having to do with atonement. There. In Exodus, it said that it refers to a large bronze basin. And it refers to where they cleanse, where at the laver, or the sea, as it was called with Solomon, they cleansed themselves. The priest did, before going and offering a sacrifice. And in Exodus 30:19, it says, "There Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet. When they go into the tent of meeting, they shall wash with water, and they shall die not, that they shall die not, nor when they come near to the altar to minister, to burn offering made by fire to the Lord." So we see here, there's a mixture here of the atonement or the cleansing, and also of the standards of the important tribes in the camp of Israel. That this imagery had a lot to do with Israel and Christ in the end. And so it says in verse 21, it says, "So they shall wash their hands, their feet, lest they die. It shall be a perpetual statute for Aaron and his descendants throughout their generations." So this cleansing was a perpetual thing. And the first laver was made of bronze, or copper. Sometimes they say copper. And it was made from the mirrors of the women who tended the tabernacle, which meant that they were reflective. And so when the priest came to cleanse, there was a reflection of himself in that cleansing water. Okay? When he looked into it. Now, and sometimes when I read that, I think about what Paul said about the mirror of the Word of God that shows us who we are for the purpose of sanctification and cleansing. The second one was Solomon's, and he built it. And if you guys have this one here, you look down here in this corner right there, and that's Solomon's sea. It held 18,000 gallons of water. Okay, this sea was where the priests cleansed themselves. Now, whenever they got many sacrifices and many priests making sacrifices, these other lavers were also used. Within the Solomon's temple, when you got inside, it was all gold. Everything was gold. And the actual Holy of Holies had no light in it. Okay? There was nothing that made light in it. And everything was gold. It was 10 cubits one direction, 10 cubits another direction, and 10 cubits high. It was a 4-square compartment. And if you read Revelation, it talks about the city of God, right? And it gives dimensions of what it is like. Okay? So there the imagery is very much of these dimensions of what God had told them to do in making the tabernacle. The tabernacle's Holy of Holies was the same way. It was a 4-square. And in there were the cherubs. On top of the lid of the ark and above the mercy seat. To think about the imagery as we move on into these chapters coming up, we think about the 4-squareness of the Holy of Holies. We think about what went on. If you look, this white little trailing, looks like a tornado going down right there. On that, it was the presence of God. It went all the way through the tabernacle, right down to the mercy seat. And so whenever you read in Revelation, you'll begin to see the description there of God high, okay, in the firmament above the creatures, okay? You see very similar imagery in what we read in Revelation that is in the Old Testament. I know this seems strange, but bear with me here. So, if we'll let's flip back one page and go to down here to the bottom, I think. Yes. So, I'm not finding it in here. If you read when it gives a description of the city, it describes the foundations. If you read the stones that are listed there, they're very much the stones that were in the breastplate of the high priest. So if you know which tribe was associated with that stone, you know which one of the tribes are there in that foundation. So to think about the imagery of the stones in the breastplate, and think about the imagery of the stones in the foundation, and what would that mean to the kingdom of God, to God's temple, to the gates in which they go into. And as we move through, there'll be more imagery coming up that I hope to bring out for consideration. My presentation today is for consideration, okay? It's for consideration. And I have put verses in here for you to look up. And if I am way someplace out there somewhere, let me know. So we're going to move on down here. And it talks about the wheels. In Ezekiel, it talks about the wheels. In Revelation, it talks about the wheels. Okay? Some of this I presented in Sunday school class. I talked a little bit about when we went through Ezekiel in our Sunday school lessons. And in this, the wheels, it says the wheels sparkle like topaz, intersecting and full of eyes. Topaz represents the tribe of Simeon in the breastplate of the high priest. Topaz is a symbol of truth and forgiveness. Intersecting wheels without end or beginning. Full of eyes without beginning or end. God sees all. There is no end to what he comprehends. And in Daniel 7:9, it says, I kept looking until thrones were placed for the assessors with the judge. And the Ancient of Days, God the Eternal Father, took his seat, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne, that sounds familiar, right? Like the first chapter of Revelation. His throne was like a fiery flame. I've never heard anyone say they wanted to come to the throne of God where the fiery flame is. I've always heard them talk about the gold on the ground and all the diamonds and emeralds and all that, but never the fire of God. His throne was like the fiery flame, and its wheels were burning fire. What an imagery, okay? What imagery. So I want to move to the Gospels and be done with this as quick as I can. The four Gospels are not all, they don't give the same depiction in the sense of events or even sometimes same presentation of events. And so I wanted to, this is what some people have seen. I don't know if you've heard of the four faces of Christ in the Gospels. I don't know if you've ever heard that. People have talked about that. And in the four Gospels, the symbol of the Gospel of Matthew is the lion, the king of the Jews. Matthew presents Jesus as the promised Messiah. Okay? The message of the Gospel of Matthew is Jewish, revealing Jesus as the star that would come out of Jacob, the scepter that would rise out of Israel, and the one who would sit on David's throne. The Gospel of Matthew reveals the kingdom of God through Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah. In Matthew 1, Jesus' genealogy is recorded from Abraham to Joseph, making Jesus the legal heir to the throne of David. So that lineage right there gives a picture of Christ, the son of David, who has the right to the throne. The symbol of the Gospel of Mark is the ox, a beast of burden, presenting the burden of sin. Representing the burden of sin, Jesus took upon himself. Mark presents Jesus as the suffering servant prophesied in Isaiah 53. Jesus humbled himself and came to do the will of his Father and to reveal the amazing love and grace of God. It is clearly seen in Jesus' own words, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life a ransom for many. There is no genealogy recorded in the Gospel of Mark because of a servant's genealogy was insignificant and not worthy of being recorded. The symbol of the Gospel of Luke is a man representing Jesus' incarnation in human form. Luke presents Jesus as the Son of Man, which is also a messianic title for from the prophecy of David, because it talks about the Son of Man coming and sitting. And as a son of David, Luke focuses on Jesus' humanity, announcing the incarnation of Christ. Luke 1 and 2, Luke, the only gospel that provides a depiction of Jesus' childhood. There's another gospel that talks about Jesus' birth, but does not present him as a child being taken to the temple, being following the Jewish law and all that. Luke's genealogy begins with Joseph, the husband of Mary. Thus, Luke traces Jesus' image through Mary, who is in the lineage of David and of the direct heir of the throne of David. The symbol of the Gospel of John is an eagle, representing majesty that is above our earth. John presents Jesus as the Son of God, the second person of the Trinity, co-equal, co-eternal with the Father and the Spirit. John's genealogy of Christ presents Jesus as the Son, coexistent with God the Father, and existing in the everlasting Godhead. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John's gospel is glorious in revealing the riches of our salvation, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me and in thee, and they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. I wanted to present these images so when you hear people talking about the revelation, you can relate it to what the Old Testament gives us and the imagery there.